Hello everyone and welcome back to the Atlas Studios development vlog. This week we're not going to be talking through the updates to Project Grove. If you want to check those out, you can check out last video or the video after this one. This week we're going to be focusing on a full tutorial on how we built our 3D UI and the sort of core behind that system and how you can replicate it in your own projects. This tutorial goes through starting a fresh project and other setups for the basic stuff. If you want to just look at how we do the actual 3D interactions with the UI, you can skip ahead using the time codes down below. However, if you want to see more of the steps and some of the tips and tricks on general interface stuff, then make sure you watch through the whole video so you don't miss anything. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to start a new project in Unreal 4.25. I'm going to be doing the first person preset. I'm going to make it, and we're just going to name it 3D UI tutorial or tutorial 3D UI, as it doesn't like having a 3 at the beginning. Today we're going to be making a super exciting game where you lift up a clipboard to your face and you press a button on it. It's going to be magical and wonderful, and so let's jump in with just creating some base stuff that we need first. So I'm going to make a new folder in the root of the content named tutorial, and with this I'm going to put in some folders and some blueprints that we're going to use and fill up later. So first the folders, animations, new folder, materials, new folder, meshes, and then lastly, UI. For our blueprints, we're going to make a new blueprint class of actor. I'm going to name this BP underscore clipboard. I'm going to make a new blueprint of player controller class. So to find this, click on blueprint class, select player controller, and create that. We're going to name this PC underscore clipboard game. And that's all the core things we need to create to start us off. Now what you want to do is go to your first person character meshes and go to the skeleton. What we're going to do is we're going to add a socket onto the right hand. So on the hand underscore R, going to right click and add socket. I'm going to name this clipboard socket and save that. In our project settings, we're going to add a new input. So edit project settings, scroll down here to input, action mappings, add a new one, name this raise clipboard. I'm going to set this to keyboard to P. So on our keyboard, we want to get the P and set. Though these things automatically save, you don't need to save that, so you can close that down. Next, inside of first person BP, we want to go to our blueprints and our first person HUD, and you want to just disconnect everything off that. We don't care about that. Inside of our first person character, we want to disconnect the input actions for fire, and we also want to disconnect begin play. Inside of our construction script, we want to disconnect the attached component to component for the gun, and that means the gun won't attach to the hands, because we're going to fill those hands with our clipboard. Back in our event graph, we want to use our event begin play, and we want to spawn that clipboard blueprint we just made and attach it to the socket we just made. So for that, we're going to go through a bit of simple script. We want to spawn actor from class, and our spawn transform, we're going to make a transform, and we're going to leave that zeroed out and with scale 1. From this return value, we're going to attach actor to component. Our parent component is going to be our mesh, so we want to drag down our mesh 2p, which is your character mesh, and put that into parent, and our socket is going to be that clipboard socket we made. Off of our mesh, we want to drag off and get our socket transform. You don't always need to do this, but it's generally safer to make sure that you just get the transform and reset the transform, as sometimes when you spawn objects, they can get some strange transforms. So off of our spawned actor, which will be of class clipboard BP, make sure you set the spawned class in there. Off of this, we're going to set actor transform. Hook that up, hook our socket transform into this, and we're going to save that all out. Now on our character, we're also going to make a variable or two. So we're going to create a Boolean variable called menu open. And we're also going to make another variable called current num. This current num isn't important. I'm going to make it of the type text. This is just so we can visualize the button clicking and showing how we can write some simple script there. The last thing we need to do is add a component to our character. This is going to be the actual component that manages our interactions with our widgets. So we're going to add a component of the type widget interaction. And for this, what you need to do over on its details is make sure the widget use index is set to 1. I found that for some reason 0 doesn't always work, and its interaction source to mouse. Now you can use this interaction in a number of ways. So if you wanted to interact with something by shooting an object at it, you could use other types of interaction sources. The interaction distance matters if you want to have UI that's very far away from the character or very close. That can sometimes change that. And you want to enable hit testing. Everything else you can leave to normal. So with our player character set up, let's set up our player controller. So go back to our tutorial and PC clipboard _ game. This is our player character we made. So on the event graph, on event begin play, all we need to do here is get a reference to our character. So I'm going to right click and get player character, cast to first person character, which is that character blueprint we were just editing. This could be whichever character you want to have the 3D interaction on. And we're going to promote this to a variable of just name char as shortened for character. And that's all we need to do for our basic setup for the player controller. Now, to make sure that the game uses this player controller, we want to go to our world and go to our game mode override and selected game mode and change this player controller type to PC _ clipboard game. So make sure that's being used in this map and in this game mode. And that is everything set up, ready to get on with making sure this all works and getting some functionality in. So with the basic setup done, the next thing I do is import a few assets that I've made that are just here to demonstrate this working. But you could use whatever you want for your project. So I'm going to drag in my 2 animations for my character that I've made. I'm going to just drag and drop them in. I'm going to not import the mesh. I'm going to set the skeleton to sk _ mannequin _ arms _ skeleton. This is the skeleton that already has an animation blueprint set up, and that means we can skip a bit of that work. So we're going to now import all. We have my 2 poses that if we open up and look at them, all they are is a clipboard being held up to the face and then a clipboard being held down. It's very simple, but that'll mean that we can hold the clipboard up to our face and it all looks vaguely nice. They're just poses, so they're static animations. There's no fancy stuff going on there. So heading over into our first person animation blueprint, let's set up the animations so we aren't holding a gun anymore. Inside of our event graph, I'm going to make a new variable, which is called menu open. And I'm going to drag out a set on this from here. I'm going to get player character, cast to first person character. I'm going to convert this to a pure cast because we don't need to worry about that. And just to stop any errors, I'm going to, off of this, drag a is valid. And that'll mean that it'll only run this if it is valid. This isn't the most optimal way to set this up. If you wanted to do it properly, I would run this on begin play and get this, save this as a variable, and then use that. But this will just mean that we can easily just do this for this tutorial. Now I want to get menu open and use that as our variable here. So this means the animation can now know when our menu is open. So inside of our state machine, we're going to go back to our anim graph. I'm going to disconnect all this stuff. We don't want any of this. We're going to right click and make a new state machine and plug this into our output pose. Inside of this, we're going to drag our 2 poses, our low and up. So we've got our up pose and our low pose. We're going to pull our entry into this and create a connection to and from the up pose. The blending doesn't really matter on this, but you can of course play with your animation as much as you want. To go from our low to our up pose, we want to make sure that isMenu is true. And to go from our up to our low pose, we want to drag in isMenu open and do a not boolean and put that in. So if the menu is not open and the animation of open is currently playing, it'll go back to the low pose. We'll compile and save that out, and you can see that animation has changed. For whatever reason, inside of Maya, I set up the animation slightly incorrectly, and so you can see the character is turned 90 degrees to the right. So all I'm going to do is zero out the rotational values, and then just rotate it in this by 90, or by minus 90. This is probably because I wasn't using a Z-up workflow inside of Maya. For whatever reason, I decided not to for this project, but that probably caused this issue of rotation. I'm now going to import our static mesh for our clipboard. So again, I'm just going to drag and drop this into the tutorial route. The only important things to note with this is that I'm going to create new materials for our simple material setup, and I'm also going to combine the meshes and import normals and tangents. This means any mesh smoothing data that I've got on the vertices inside of Maya, that gets brought in. Now I'm going to save all just to save that out. For some reason it's brought in Lambert 1, which I don't want, so I'm going to open this up and just remove Lambert 1 so I can delete that out. The rest of these are fine. I'm going to quickly set them up with some very simple materials so that we have a beautiful low poly clipboard. Now, with the materials set up, I'm going to pull my mesh into my meshes folder and my materials into my materials folder. This isn't the most optimal way to do these materials because they're all basically the same. I could have used material instances, but for the sake of this tutorial, it was easier to do it this way. Now, on my blueprint clipboard, I'm going to open this up. On our default route, I'm going to add a component of static mesh. I'm going to name this static mesh clipboard mesh. Compile and save that out. For our default values, I'm going to put the clipboard onto the static mesh, and that should be all okay. You can see we've got our lovely clipboard in here. We will be later adding the UI to this blueprint, and then the character will have to interact with this blueprint's UI in a 3D manner. The only thing we need to make sure is that we set this to have no collision, because if not, the player will slide around. As you probably would have found out if you've ever spawned objects onto a character before, if it collides with physics objects or dynamic objects, it causes very weird movement. So we're just going to have no collision on this mesh, as it doesn't need to have any. Now that we have our mesh in the project, we can go into our animations and set up the correct socket position so that the character holds the clipboard in the right way. So going over into our first person character mesh skeleton, we can set our preview controller to specific animation, and we'll use our clipboard up pose so we can position the clipboard in the right place. Right now, the socket we made will be down in the hierarchy right here, and it's just on the wrist itself. I'm going to set my motion of the movement to world movement so I can just position it a bit more easily. I want to position it kind of in the center and up a bit. However, this process is very annoying because I can't see where the thing is, and I don't really know where it's going to go. So if I right click on my socket, I can add a preview asset, and if I type clipboard in here, we can add the asset. So now we can see exactly what this is going to look like. So now it's just a process of positioning it correctly. Now that we've got our clipboard beautifully positioned, we can move on to the next step. The last thing we need to do before we move on to UI is to set the input so we can raise and lower our clipboard. So inside of our player controller, which is where I like to put all of my inputs, I'm going to right click and put input raise clipboard. On pressed, I want to do a branch node, and again I'm going to get my reference that I created on begin play. So get my character, get menu open, and depending on where the menu is open, if this is true, I want to set menu open to false and set show mouse cursor to false. and set input mode game only. For this can work if you don't get reference to self, but just to be safe, I like to get a reference to self. And so again, off character, I want to set menu open to true. And this is, if menu is open is false, it's going to then open the menu, so setting everything to true. We're going to set our mouse cursor to be visible. This way we can see what we're clicking on. And the last thing we're going to do is set our input mode game and UI. I found that UI only, whilst it does let you click on the UI, even in 3D, so I found that setting it input mode to only UI means that you cannot close the menu ever again, and inputs like this input action don't work anymore. So I like to set it to game and UI. You'll see the issue with this in a minute where you can still move the character around, but you can fix this by just setting a boolean and having a branch node inside of your player character. And with that set up, we can move on to setting up our simple UI to test this 3D UI setup. Jumping into our UI folder, we're going to create 2 widgets. So right click on user interface and then widget blueprint, and we're going to name this one widget blueprint underscore clipboard, and we're going to make another one which we're going to name widget blueprint underscore post it. These are our 2 widgets that will be displayed and interactable. So opening up our widget blueprint clipboard, we want to change fill screen to custom with a width of 700 and a height of 1000. This can be any size you want, but this will work for our clipboard. We're going to add a very simple title text, which we're going to name very important game mechanic, because we're making some very important game mechanics right now. We're going to add a button, which we're going to add some text to, and we're going to call add stuff. And the last thing we're going to do is, because we're going to show inputs with clicking buttons, we're also going to show how to do scroll boxes and scroll panels inside of this. So let's get a scroll box and add this as well. Inside of our scroll box, we're going to get some text just to show the scroll working. I'm going to name this text 0 scroll. We're going to take this text and we're going to use Control W to duplicate it a bunch so we can test scrolling working in our game. Now I'm going to just do a little bit of visual stuff to make this look slightly better. So with that set up, we're going to save and compile that widget out, and we're going to open up our other widget, our post-it. We're again going to change fill screen to custom. I'm going to make it 300 by 300. This is going to be very simple. We're going to add a size box, which is going to make the same size as this, and we're going to add some text to that size box. And we're going to set this text to be in the middle. I'm going to make the text 0. Our color opacity again is going to be black. I'm going to make it font. We're going to up the scale to 40, much higher than that. So with our 2 widgets set up, we're now going to add them to our clipboard. So going back to our tutorial blueprints, we're going to open up our blueprint underscore clipboard, go to the viewport, zoom in a bit, and we're going to add 2 components to our clipboard mesh. We're going to add 2 widget components. We're going to name this one Clipboard UI, and we're going to, back on our clipboard mesh, add another widget. I'm going to name this one Post-it UI. On our clipboard UI, we're going to set the widget class to widget blueprint clipboard. We're going to set the draw size of our UI to the same thing that we set this to be, so 700 by 1000. So we're going to set this to 700 by 1000. And this now means that our UI is the same layout and looks nice. It's much larger in scale than the clipboard is, but that's because we want to scale this down so that we don't get any pixelation in our text or our buttons. So we're going to set our scale, we're going to lock it, and we're going to set it to 0.03. And this is about the right scale that we want. We're going to rotate it and position it so that it's in the right position. I'm going to do the exact same thing for our post-it UI. So with those positioned, we can now see our UI on our clipboard. For this setup to work, you generally want things to be flat. So clipboards, books, posters, these sort of things will work best. So now we're going to make some very simple functionality for our UI. On our text, in our post-it widget, we're going to create a new binding for the text. And we're going to do like, as we've done before, get player character, cast to first person character, and then we're going to get current num. I'm going to plug that in as our return and complete this execution graph. Compile, save that out, and that's everything we need for the post-it. Inside of our clipboard, on our button clicked, we're going to add an on clicked, and we're going to do exactly the same thing, get player character, cast to first person character. As this, we're going to set current num, and what we're going to set this to is a little additive thing. So we need to create a quick variable called current num. We're going to make this of the type integer. We're going to get and set it. So in between here and here, we're going to integer plus integer. We're going to add 1 to it, set the current num to that added 1. From here, we're going to do a toText from integer, and we're going to plug that into our text. And this will just mean when we click the button on our clipboard, it'll add 1 to the counter on our post-it note. A very simple functionality, but it will show that everything's working and that everything's performing as we want. Inside of our player controller, you can see that I forgot to tick show mouse cursor when you open the menu. So we're going to tick that variable and compile, save that. Now we finished our UI, we can open up our actual game and play. And as we go into the game, we can move around and do all the usual first person stuff. When we press P, we'll bring up our clipboard, and you can see we can hover over this button and press it, but nothing will happen. Because although we've got a widget interaction and it's reading the mouse and it's doing the things, we haven't told it what to do when we actually press the mouse button. We haven't told it how to actually interact with the 3D world. We're going to escape out of this and we're going to set up the meat and potatoes of this actual setup and do the 3D UI. So inside of our character, we need to set up some custom events. So go into our event graph, above our begin play, we're going to right click custom event. We're going to name this one press pointer. We're going to make another one and name this one release pointer. This press and release pointer is how we tell the widget that we're clicking something. So we're going to get our widget interaction, which we added at the start, to our character, and we're going to drag off it and do press pointer key. And we're going to do it again, and we're going to do release pointer key. And this will tell it to release and press the mouse button. So what we need to do is for this key, we need to set left mouse button. For here, left mouse button. So this is all we need really for the character to know how to press things. There's a bit more setup that needs to be done in the controller. I'm also going to set up scrolling. So for scrolling, I'm going to right click custom event. I'm going to do wheel up. I'm going to do another one. Wheel down. We're going to grab our widget interaction and do scroll wheel. And our scroll data for scroll up will be 1. And our scroll data for scroll down using the same node will be -1. These values can be changed to change scroll speed. So if your game relies heavily on scrolling, then that could be a nice variable for you to change depending on player settings, etc. And that's everything we need to do in our player character. Now the last thing we need to do is in our player controller is create left mouse button. So when left mouse button is pressed, we need to get our character again. And on a branch on menu open, we're going to do this branch for pressed. And if it's true, we're going to get our character and we're going to press pointer. And the same thing for release. We're going to copy and paste our branch. We're going to put in the menu open as our branch variable. And off of character, we're going to release pointer. This just means that these interactions will only happen when you're inside the menu. So you can have your mouse button pressed to do other things when you're in the actual game itself. Mouse wheel down and mouse wheel up. These two will be how we control our mouse scroll. So again, we're going to copy and paste this exact branch setup. On these ones, we only want to go off the pressed. and then the second pressed. You don't want anything for released because that's not how the scroll wheel works. I'm going to do the exact same thing. We're going to do or wheel up, if I can remember the name of the custom events I made, and wheel down. And that is everything you should need to set up this UI. Let us press play and see if this works. So right now we cannot interact with the UI and nothing's happening. But when we press P, we can add stuff, and you can see that the number starts to increase. That means the script from our button is being played and it's being shown up here. Down here on the scroll wheel, I can scroll down and up and interact with this scroll wheel as usual. However, this doesn't work. Pressing and holding and dragging doesn't work because right now I haven't set it up so you can't move the camera. But that can work if you do a bit more work to your character blueprint. But the core action of being able to scroll works. The other thing that won't work in this current setup is typing. So if you have custom text inputs, that won't work currently. However, you could make a system with that using on these inputs, the key you press could be found dynamically depending on what key the player is pressing in the game. So that's how you could do a more typing UI. And with our very exciting game, with its very important game mechanic done, I hope this explains the basics of 3D UI and how to do it. If you have any further questions on other ways to do this or other things that you want to know about, then don't hesitate to put them in the comments below. If you want to learn more about Project Grove, we haven't mentioned it much in this video. If you check any of our other videos or go to our Steam page, you can check that out as well. The links will be in the description below. Thanks so much for watching and have a lovely rest of your day.